Hello, my friends, and welcome to the RobCast. I'm here in the back house with Debra Searle. Welcome.
Thank you.
Home is Plymouth, England.
It is.
The English coast, English Channel.
Yes.
And this is her first time in the back house.
It's good to be here. Just having heard about it, it's nice to see what it actually looks like.
Does it lives up to whatever was looming large in your
Oh,
imagination?
yeah. Well, anywhere where there's surfboards is always good in my mind.
Oh, I love it. That was a great opening line. Okay, my friends, I know when I do interview somebody in the RobCast, you're always like, what's the angle? Where are we headed? Who is this person? Why are they in the back house? So let's start, because as soon as I interacted with you and then did the normal Google thing, I was like, oh my word, I have 1,000 questions for her. So several years ago, 2001, you got in a rowboat
Yeah.
and rowed alone across the Atlantic Ocean.
Yes.
You started in England?
No, I started in Tenerife off the coast of Africa, which is traditionally, so the trade winds go from Tenerife across to the Caribbean, so from Africa across to the Caribbean. It's the old trade route, spice route. And so if you leave at a certain time of year, the conditions are prevailing in that direction.
So you see this once again, I have like 9,000 questions. And you rode from the tip of Africa and you landed where?
In Barbados, which is a great place to finish if you're going to spend 3.5 months in a rowing boat.
Dear RobCast listeners, if you're going to row across the Atlantic Ocean alone, Barbados apparently is a wonderful place. Okay, how many days did it take?
It took me 111 days.
Which is like
3.5 months of of high adventure on the high seas.
Okay. Now, we got to go back. Where did the idea come from? And had you been doing things like this before that?
So I'd never rowed before. I was a novice rower. And I had done a lot of...
Wait, you never rowed before, meaning...
No, so so to explain and put it into some kind of context, I, as a teenager, got obsessed with adventures and explorers. And I'd read all these books by these kind of Scott of Antarctica and remember reading a book by Ranulph Fiennes, who's a kind of great British explorer, still alive, and thinking, I want his job. And so I told my careers advisor and said, I'm going to be a professional adventurer. And she was like, that's not a career for a young lady.
How old are you at that age when you said
I'm
that?
like 15.
And you're living where?
In Plymouth, in Devon, yeah.
And how did people see, like, women and empowerment and careers and what's possible? Was that abnormal for a young woman to have that sort of...
completely. Yeah, completely. This was a ridiculous idea. But I never gave up on it as an idea. I even found a degree course where I could specialize in adventure education. So I kind of did all my mountain leadership qualifications and canoe and kayak instructor and left with all these instructor tickets. And I came over to the US actually in the summer and would work in summer camps in teaching canoe and kayak, just anything to do with adventure I loved. And I met lots of other nutty adventurers at university, so started to do more and more adventurous trips, really upskilling. And then kind of went into a teaching job first, was teaching kids in the outdoors. But what I really wanted to do was do this cycle that I saw explorers doing, where they'd go on an expedition. Well, actually, before that, they have to get a sponsor, then they go on an expedition. Then they come back and they write a book or they make a program or they do talks about it, then they get the next one. And it kind of goes round in a cycle. I thought, that's what I want to do. And then it didn't seem like it was going to be possible as a career until the Atlantic Row came up as an idea. And I'd met my husband and he was, he'd rowed internationally, so he was a 6'5", big guy. And he kind of saying, I'd love to come on one of your adventures. And this one seemed the perfect one for us to do together when this concept of an Atlantic rowing race came up. So we entered it was a double-handed crew race.
Other people were rowing at the same time?
Yeah. So we all left from Tenerife, started gun, went. 2 people in the boat in identical boats. They arrived, they looked like an IKEA wardrobe when they arrived. They're 24 sheets of marine plywood. And you've got to build this thing as part of the challenge.
You built the boat.
Yeah.
Had you built a boat before?
No. So we
You rowed across the Atlantic in a boat you built.
Yeah, we
and
did
it's
get
the
a bit of
first
help.
boat you built.
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is all alongside, having a full-time job, and so it was a busy time just getting to the start line. And we set off on this thing, and and it was an odd time in Tenerife, because when we lined up alongside all these other competitors, there were 36 or 7 boats in this thing. We were the only mixed sex team, and so when I stand next to Andrew, I'm like 5'4" and a bit, and Andrew's 6'5", and all the other rowers were quite similar to him. And so we were this joke, entry, like the comedy, that if anyone wasn't going to make it, it was Debra.
Do a number of people row across the Atlantic every year?
They didn't at that time. So in 2001, no, I mean, hardly anyone had. And I think there was one other woman that had done it or something. So, it was, now it's much more.
Wait, you're the
often.
second woman?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. So this hasn't been done much.
No.
There isn't that much of a body of knowledge about what to expect when rowing.
No, I mean, so this was the second race they'd done. They did one 4 years before, and I think at that point more people had been to the moon than had rowed an ocean.
That's a good stat, by the way.
It is. So we went thinking, are we going to live or die? Is it, there was a real sense of unknown, and it was what attracted me to the project, because I'd been doing a lot of mountaineering, and and it seemed like all the good mountains had been climbed, all the rivers had been run, and this was a really unusual challenge, and one that Andrew and I could do together because he was a great rower.
And what were people like, family, friends, neighbors, siblings, saying to you about this idea when you first started to share it?
I think initially they probably thought, yeah, no, it's not going to happen, and the novelty will wear off. They won't get to the start line. But then, as we got closer and they saw that it was going to happen, they were incredibly supportive. I suppose my parents had got used to me going off doing crazy stuff, so yeah, they were great about it.
Really? Amazing. So you start off.
We start off, and then very quickly it becomes apparent that things are not going to pan out how we had anticipated. Really, on the first night, it's quite hard to describe, but I suppose really what we discovered was Andrew has a really crippling phobia of open ocean, which, of course, was quite an unfortunate time to discover this.
When you tell this part of the story, how do crowds normally respond?
I think normally they laugh because it seems so ridiculous. Like, how can you set to sea in a rowing boat and not know? But we did nearly all our training on the River Thames in London, so we had no idea that this would be a problem for him. And it wasn't until we lost sight of land that it became a problem. And it got worse and worse as the next few days developed, and got to the stage where he was having panic attacks, and so we were left with no choice really than to call for a rescue. He was losing dramatic amounts of weight. He wasn't eating or drinking. And I was loving it. And this was the real challenge. Like, I'm there having the time of my life, feeling like I was born for this challenge. And seeing him struggle was desperate. And I got to the point where I knew that we couldn't go on as we were. So I called for a rescue yacht. And they came and picked Andrew up, and I was then left with this massive decision. Do I get off onto this nice big rescue boat and go home with him, or do I stay out here and try and finish it for both of us?
And this is a boat that the two of you were rowing.
Yeah, it's designed.
So if you stay on the boat, then it's one person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it needed adapting a little bit, and while we waited for this rescue boat to arrive, we spent some time modifying everything so that we could make it as safe as possible for me on my own. But I mean, it's one of those things where naivety is bliss. Looking back now, I mean, it's ridiculous. Had I been washed overboard by a wave, there was no boat going to follow along behind me. As soon as they took Andrew, they were going back to get him to land, to get him medical assistance. So, if I'd been washed overboard, that'd have been it. No, they wouldn't have even known I was in the water. They wouldn't have been coming back to get me.
Okay, so there's a moment when the rescue boat shows up, and he gets on it. And you either get on it and hook your boat to the back or whatever it is, or you just row away alone.
Yeah.
And you decide to row away alone.
Yeah.
Into the open ocean, and the boat goes the other direction.
Yeah, and that was an odd moment, because I just was watching them
Yes.
sailing away, thinking, well, that's it. I'm on my own now, and no idea how long this thing's going to take. With Andrew on board, we thought it would take maybe six weeks or 40 days. I had no idea I was going to be out there for 3.5 months.
Wait,
and had
where are the other people who started the race?
all hundreds of miles apart by this point. The front runners are well ahead. If to put it into context, the winners, the day they won, I looked at my chart and I still had 2,000 miles to go. So there was very quickly the teams got split up. I didn't see any other boats the rest of the time.
For 3.5 months.
The only boats I saw were container ships, which were the bane of my life,
Because they're huge.
Because they're huge and they're not looking out for a woman in a rowing boat. So, there's
they're
they
huge
were constant problem.
and they're not looking out for women in rowing boats. Do they put up a wake?
Yeah. So the bow wave off the front is the big problem because it's throwing 30 feet in the air, this wall of water coming off the bow. And so, I took it upon myself that they weren't going to get out of my way. They did. I mean, most of the time they've got it on autopilot, so they're not looking out. They actually couldn't see me most of the time. When I managed to speak to someone on the radio, they couldn't see me on the radar. So that was the problem because when I slept, nobody was on watch. So I timed it, and from when I saw a ship on one horizon to when they crossed my position was generally about 20 minutes. So I only ever slept for 20 minutes at a time. So it became this very grueling routine of doing 2 hours rowing, 1 hour off, 2 hours rowing, 1 hour off. And in the 1 hour off, you've got to eat a huge amount. You've got to eat about 8,000 calories a day. And then there's fixing of the boat to do. There's navigation always to do. And then that left about 20 minutes to sleep at the end of every hour off.
For 3.5 months,
yeah.
You're doing 20 minutes sleeps.
Yeah.
Okay, really obvious. I'm completely ignorant. I think I've proven that. Let's go to the details. The food, you have that much food on the rowboat.
Yeah, so the race organisers didn't know particularly, they weren't confident how long it would take everyone. So they made everyone take 60 days food per person. So I had 120 days food because I had Andrews as well. It's freeze-dried or boil in the bag. It's all packed into the hull of the boat in little bags. And then you purify seawater. So you have solar panels that charge a car battery that run the water maker. And so you mix the purified seawater with this hideous freeze-dried food. And that's what you live off. And it's disgusting. I mean, it's a miserable
But you have to
way
do
of life.
8,000 calories
Yeah.
in these little breaks between navigation and 20-minute naps.
Yeah.
Multiple times throughout the day.
Yeah.
Because your energy output is just through the roof.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
And then your navigation, it's just you.
Yeah.
Like with maps?
Yes, so you have Atlantic charts and you have a GPS that also runs off the solar power. So you've got your latitude and longitude. And the challenge with that actually was that we left quite soon after September the 11th. So we'd heard that there was possibilities that, the American government might turn the GPS system off or, there was all kinds of rumors about what might happen after September the 11th. So we learned astronavigation, we went on courses so that I could use a sextant and just a chart and an almanac if I had to. And thankfully I didn't have to because it's really complicated and actually you need a fairly stable platform and the boat is never stable. It's constantly rocking, so to take a sextant reading off the sun is extremely difficult.
So when you talk about like pre-GPS and Magellan, all the great explorers who are like literally in the ocean with the stars, that was actually incredibly difficult to do.
Oh, yeah, unbelievably so, and then that's just the first bit. Then the kind of mathematical calculations you have to do from what you read from the almanacs is that bit's complicated as well. So,
and when you're doing that, you're not rowing, just a basic.
No.
You're just sitting there. When you're sleeping,
the boat drifts.
And there's like are there like water anchors I've read about that sort of hold it in place or what?
Yes, so there's no anchor because at certain points it's 5 kilometers deep. So,
but like, what's the thing that I've heard people put over the boat to sort of hold it in place?
So if you've got a very strong headwind, you can put out what's called a para anchor or
That's
parachute
what I've heard
anchor.
of, yeah.
So it's off the bow, it's on a long rope, and it's like a thin nylon parachute, just like you jump out of a plane with, and it sits just under the surface of the water and stops the boat being dragged. It slows the drag backwards if you're into a headwind. So if it was really stormy, I'd get in there's a coffin-shaped little cabin at the back, and I'd get in that and close the hatch down, and I'd be sitting on the parachute anchor rolling around until the storm had passed, and I'd get out and pull the anchor in. But when you're just in your normal breaks, what you're doing is letting the boat drift. And so I'd sleep with a little handheld GPS in my hand on the cushions inside this cabin bit, which is tiny, like it is really like a coffin. And the first thing I do when I open my eyes, I would look at my latitude and longitude and see had I drifted forwards or backwards. And some days you lose all the miles that you've spent all morning rowing, and other days you get lucky and you go slightly further towards Barbados.
Okay, the psychological battle seems like it would be devastating. Or it would be euphoria followed by devastating.
Without a doubt, this is a psychological challenge. I like 95% this is a mental challenge, because I mean, partly the hardest thing is the loneliness. You think about it, even if people choose to live alone, they would hand over money in a shop, or they'd walk past someone in the street. But when you see nobody for month after month, it's not right. I think we're designed to communicate and to give love and receive love, and not having that outlet is awful. And so you give it to anything. So for me, it was the sea turtles or the fish. I'd have these very lengthy conversations with the marine life because they're just desperate to speak to something. And I had a teddy bear on board that a girl had given me, and I'd have these lengthy conversations with Woody. It's a bit like that Tom Hanks movie Castaway.
Well, that's actually the image that I just thought
of.
Yeah,
I mean, that I don't know how they researched that film, but it's exactly right. The relationship he has with Wilson, which is a handprint on a ball for those who haven't seen the movie.
Once again, Tom Hanks got it right.
Yeah, he did. Nails it every time.
It really is like it. How did you ever wonder, am I going crazy?
I did worry about that. So what I would do is you have a ship's logbook where you record the weather conditions, and that's every ship has one.
A rowboat's logbook.
Yeah, and I would write, also journal in that, and I'd write about how I was feeling and what was going on, and then I'd always leave it about 5 days, and then I'd read back 5 days and go, okay, does that sound like a crazy person? Because I was worried, like, how do you tell if you're going crazy? And you hear all these maritime stories of people being at sea for months and going mad. And
absolutely. And the books I've read on rowing the oceans, and there's a guy who ended up in rowing the coast of Russia and ended up in North Korea, and the stories are like just a slow descent into madness often.
And yet I found the complete opposite. I came back having complete clarity about things I couldn't find in life on land. And I think part of that is that we're so busy all the time. And I found, because the daily life out there is quite routine, it's quite simple, it's very basic, that I could retrieve things from my memory that I had never remembered before, stuff from my childhood. And because all of a sudden I didn't have all this frontal lobe busyness to block the path of those memories. So I think that because of that, I had a lot of time to sit and think and remember stuff, and came back incredibly peaceful. My father had died of leukemia at 58, quite soon before I left for the row. And I'd had these few years of just torture of, I wish he'd be alive for this, I wish he'd be alive to be there at the end of the row. Left kind of tormented about it, and came back with this complete peace about it all, because we're so busy we don't even give ourselves time to grieve. And I had that time out there, and I miss it now. That's why I still have to go out on, on surf or kayak and put my hands on the water occasionally and just go, okay, we're all right again now.
I know all about that. And so did you talk to anybody?
I had a
satellite
satellite
radio,
phone.
Your satellite phone?
Yeah, I had a satellite phone that ran off the solar power. So if the conditions were right and had enough battery power, I could call home. And I did call home a lot, actually. My twin sister was invaluable. Andrew was really helpful.
And did you call and say, like, hey, how you guys doing?
I did more and more, because I was desperate for company and conversation. And my phone bill at the end was about £12,500. So it became a real lifeline. I'm not sure I would have even made it without that phone.
Yeah. And what are at that point, what are the conversations like with your husband?
Very practical. He was able to analyze weather in a way that I couldn't. So he'd be feeding me weather information, generally just being a support, being...
Yeah, because there's like a pressing thing you're doing where you need as much help as possible.
I do. And I was, some days I would ring up and I'd be euphoric, and I'd just seen dolphins leaping out the water right next to me and landing with a big splash after a somersault. And you ring on those days, and then you also, he would never know what he'd get, because then the next time I might call and I'd be in floods of tears, which happened more often than the other sort of calls, because I just felt I couldn't cope with it anymore.
What's the most scared you were? Was it a storm?
There were storms. There were 2 hurricanes while I was out there. They were north of my position, but the effects travel a long way across the ocean, and they were bad. I remember one of the waves. It knocked the boat over on its side, and I had a navigation light, which was the only thing really the ships could ever see at night for me, because I didn't really show on their radar. And it knocked the navigation light off, and I was in the main shipping lane that goes from down the side of America, so from north to South America, and I knew I couldn't be seen, and it was 3 o'clock in the morning, and I was in a panic about what to do. I was convinced I was going to get run over, because by this point I'd been at sea for 2.5 months, and I'm exhausted and irrational, and I that was a really bad night. And then there were sharks, with the other thing that really freaked me out initially, because I just didn't have any knowledge. Like my sole knowledge of sharks was based on the Jaws movies I'd seen in the 80s. So I honestly thought they were going to munch through the side of the boat and eat me. And so early on, what happens when the sharks were swimming around the boat at night is, when they move fast through the water, these phosphorescence, the glow off their back, the water gets disrupted, and it's like a lightning bolt. It's greens and yellows, and so when they move fast, it looks like a lightning bolt moving around the boat. And I saw this lightning bolt. I was watching it for a while swimming around, and then it dashed off to the side, and I thought, oh, thank goodness it's gone. And then it started heading for the side of the boat at great speeds, and I thought, this is it, I'm going to die. And I dived into the little cabin bit and shut the hatch down, which was ridiculous, because the boat's made of 6mm thick plywood. Like, it's not going to protect me. But because I couldn't see it, somehow it was better. And I soon realized after that actually they weren't after me. I'd have a lot of fish that were attracted to the light, or they'd shelter underneath the boat, and so the sharks would often be chasing the dorado or the other fish that were around the boat.
You were like this mobile ecosystem.
I was. It was like having it was like being in a floating aquarium. So you'd look over the side of the boat, and because there's barnacles and seaweed growing on the bottom, because I was going so slowly, this marine life is just constantly nibbling and attracted to this, and particularly the sea turtles, which I loved. They were like the best company, because they're funny and Jurassic, and they'd dive underneath, and I could hear them scratching and scraping on the bottom and eating the weed. But then they come up for air, and they kind of exhale with such gusto, because they've been holding their breath so long, like, and their eyes would like shake and wobble, and then I always gave them names, and I think one, Albert, would dive down and every time misjudge how deep the boat was and kind of headbutt the side of the boat, like, ugh, I missed again, and you kind of back up a bit, and then, and watching all of this and being part of it and feeling like you're at one with it. It's hard not to feel like you're at one with it, because I was away from people and land and society and news and all of that for so long that became my norm, to the point that when I got to the other side, I was in tears the night before on the phone to my twin Hayley, saying, I'm going to turn around and row back. I can't do it. I'd been told that like the world's media were camped out in Barbados waiting for me, and I couldn't face the thought of that.
Because, yeah, you had, in the great tradition, you had like a unitive, an extended season of oneness with everything, in which the boundaries dissolve.
Yeah.
And you see the seamless, integrated nature of everything, but then just day after day after day.
Yeah, and the wonder of it all. Like I would find myself watching this marine life going, thank you, God, like this creation, this. And I'm like, why am I thanking God? I don't even believe in God. Like it was
so you weren't somebody who's, this is interesting. So before the row, you wouldn't have described yourself as like a spiritual worldview or the depth of life or all that. You were like, nah, it's just this life and just what we can see, etc.
Yeah, I grew up going to church as a child, but I was taking a very long sabbatical from it.
But then something happens out in the ocean.
Yeah, because you can't help but feel the weight of this creation pressing on you. Like the beauty of it is so awesome that I found myself thinking, this can't be chance. Like this is too beautiful for this just to be chance.
So you could die at any moment. It's terrifying. There are sharks. You're exhausted and wondering if you're going crazy, but you're also overwhelmed with gratitude and wonder and awe for the source of it all.
Yeah.
All of it at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, my word. So you get to shore in Barbados.
Yes.
And there are cameras waiting? Are there boats that meet you as you start to come in?
Yeah, there's a flotilla of boats waiting. And so the welcome I received was phenomenal. But there was also, all the American TV networks, the BBC, so all the journalists were there as well. And the sound, like all I've heard is wind and waves, and it's just been blue and grey for so many months. And it's like this huge sensory overload where
people are yelling, I assume, engines, all that.
As I rode into the marina in Port St Charles in Barbados, all of the big super yachts there, the captains are all hooting their horns. These big, like 120-foot yachts, so you feel the horn vibrating in your lungs, like it's so loud. And I was completely in sensory overload. But as soon as I saw my family on this boat coming towards me, all the fear about finishing and integrating back into society, it just all went away. These incredible people who'd got me across and who loved me, and I hadn't appreciated how much pressure I'd put them under, how incredibly selfish I'd been, until I saw their faces, particularly my mum's, because of course Dad had just died, and she's on her own, and it just hit me like she has spent every night lying in bed thinking, I have no idea if my daughter is dead or alive now. And it's only now that I'm a mother myself, I realise how impressive that was, to never say to me, do you realise what you're putting us all through by carrying on alone? And it changed my view of parenting. It made me realise that actually as a parent, it's often what we don't say that shows how much we love them rather than what we do say.
Oh, my word, that's profound. How many times you hold your tongue and just let them have the experience?
Yeah.
Because that's what love requires in that moment.
Yeah.
The freedom to go find out. Oh, my word. When you got on land, describe for me what it was like to touch land.
Wobbly. so I couldn't walk. And I'd been told to expect this by the other crews everyone had finished by this point. Some of them had finished months ago and gone home. And I stepped off land.
But you won in some other way.
Well, that's an interesting way of putting it, because I remember the Times newspaper wrote an editorial, and the editor wrote, "The woman is the girl who came last." No, the winner is the girl who came last, or something like that.
Something British and clever.
Yeah, yeah. And I did feel like that because I'd had this incredible experience. I didn't have the pressure of the race that all the other guys had had, where they're constantly pushing each other in this partnership on this boat to who's going to do the longest rowing shift, because I wasn't in the race. I'd been disqualified. So I had instead the chance to have this beautiful experience.
Wow. And you get on land and you're a little wobbly. What has happened to your body? What happens then to your body over the next... How long do you stay in Barbados before you go back to England?
Well, I went back to England the next day because I got a phone call saying... and we had a lot of offers from the media. And this one, where there was a chat show at the time that was like our biggest chat show in the UK. And they rang and they're like, please, let us fly you back. Meg Ryan's on the show and we want you to come on with Meg Ryan. So I did. I flew back with Andrew. We did this interview, and then they flew us back to Barbados to have this 2-week holiday with our family that we had planned right from the beginning. So I had a brief spell back in England, and then was back in Barbados to celebrate.
And what is your what is your body feeling like or doing?
That was a real surprise. I didn't have big problems adjusting to life at sea, but I had really bad problems returning to land. My ear balance had adjusted so much to the motion that where every time I tried to walk anywhere, it was like not knowing which way is up. There's no sense of kind of gravity. And because my calf muscles had wasted away, because you don't use those in this rowing action, if I start to fall, I had no leg muscles to kind of stop myself. So I had to walk everywhere with a person either side for a few days, and they would walk me round, and which is fine until, of course, one of them would go to the bar and the other one would go to the bathroom, and I'd be like, oh, quick, someone, oh, no. And I'd be on the floor in a pile again. And so I fell over a lot in the first few days. I couldn't eat because your body adjusts to this kind of hideous, sloppy food. And then digesting solids is really hard.
Yeah.
And so I'd vomit a lot. I got really bad land sickness as well. Felt queasy all the time. And yeah, if I went and...
You've been in the ocean for several months, but then you get land sick.
Yeah. So
everything's like upside down. Everything's
completely,
backwards.
If I got back on the boat that was tied up in the marina and it was bobbing around, I felt great. But if I got off and stood on the pontoon, which was cement, I felt awful.
And what happened to that sense of wonder and awe about creation?
It stayed, and I long for it. It's one of the reasons that I still keep doing the expeditions every year. I can't let go of it.
Interesting. It stayed. So then you start to adjust back to life, and your marriage. What happens there?
I think initially the challenge really brought us together. It was quite unifying, and then it didn't work out. Yeah, and he found someone he preferred, and we got divorced about a couple of years later.
And what are you doing in that time? So your marriage ends. You're not in the ocean. What do you do? What happens next?
Well, it was a weird time because career-wise, everything took off because of the row. I got employed by the BBC to be a host, and that was a weird thing. In the middle of the Atlantic, I was nearly run over one day by a ship, and I called.
How close is the ship?
Oh, like I'm like bouncing down the side of this thing, and I'm ring up Hayley, hysterical, like, get me a rescue. And she's on the other end of the phone going...
Your sister?
Yeah, my twin Hayley. She said, you can't quit. And I'm like, you've got to get me a rescue. She's like, no, you can't quit because you're going to be a TV presenter. And I'm like, I don't want to be a TV presenter. I just don't want to die. I'm like hysterical. And she keeps going on and on about this. And she's naming programs. You're going to work on Grandstand, which at the time was the BBC's flagship sports program. You're going to be a host like Sue Barker, like she named this woman who used to front a lot of the programs. And I'm thinking, what's crazy? What is she telling me this for?
Odd thing to be saying, right?
And she has this huge faith. And if she said to me at the time, I've had this prophecy, I'd have been like, what? I don't believe in prophecy, So she couldn't say why she was saying it. But within a few months of getting back, I presented my first program on Grandstand for the BBC. And I think for me, it was the evidence I needed that there's a divine being out there that has a plan for our lives. And sometimes we're guided to things that we could not possibly imagine doing.
Oh, my word. It's just so fantastic and weird.
It is. And as a cynical, person who had no faith, I guess I needed that level of convincing, that kind of, here's a prophecy that months later comes true. That seems like you don't just walk into a job at the BBC.
No,
you don't just work on one of the biggest sports programs.
So you're doing that.
So I'm doing that, and I then start this weird job where I become a trustee of the Duke of Edinburgh's award, which is a big royal charity, and so I'm working really closely with Prince Philip and Prince Edward, who are the Queen's husband and son, and so I'm going to these regular meetings at Buckingham Palace, and so life is like gone bonkers. Like, what is going on here? Like, this is so far from the life before the row, and I'm being given opportunities by the BBC to, here's funding, go and do another expedition, and we'll come with you and film it. So I'm getting the chance to do expeditions and get them funded and have beautiful TV programs made out of them, and yet in my home life it's like disaster. Like I'm moving out and I'm living in a little flat on my own and feeling desperately lonely.
And by the way, I like that you just stopped that like that. And you
I don't know what else to say about it.
No, I love it. I so appreciate it when people tell the story as it actually was. But hey, it's okay. You know what I mean? It was difficult.
It was. I remember saying to someone at the time, going through a divorce. I divorced Andrew for adultery, and I remember saying, this is way harder than rowing the Atlantic. I had no appreciation of the emotional turmoil. I mean, we're, in a way, the one blessing was we didn't have children to complicate the situation. But it was horrible, hard, really hard, and emotionally just took me to a place I'd never been before.
And so you've had this awakened sense of the divine, of God, of meaning, hope, some sense that there's a path in all of this. So you keep going. You're doing expeditions.
Mm.
And is there some, do you have some, like, oh, this is now what it's all going to look like? Or is it just bit by bit, new things come your way? What does your life look like then, 10 years after the row?
Well, I think a big part of the puzzle was meeting my now husband, Tim. He
The surfer.
Tim the surfer.
We already like him.
Yeah.
Shout out to Tim.
Yeah, I think he healed my broken heart. I had all these preconceived ideas about particularly the Christian faith and what leading a life as a Christian would mean as a divorced woman, and I grew up with a lot of the stigmas going to church that others would, around divorce being a bad thing and you marry for life and you make it work. So I had this guilt about that. I met this guy who'd been waiting for the one. He was in his mid-30s, had not married, was waiting for the right woman, had this fantastic faith that I respected enormously, and thought he's never going to be interested in me as a divorcee, because that's what I grew up believing, being told.
Oh, interesting.
And I remember him saying to me once that this God is a God of second chances. And I thought that was such a great way of putting it. And his whole family, came with that approach, even though his father was in ministry, his brother's in ministry, and they've loved me and accepted me as I am, and I'm enormously grateful because they healed that hole in my heart.
Isn't it interesting how a person will hear something in some impressionable early portion of life that could be completely insane or illogical, but some authority figure somewhere sort of emblazons it on the psyche, and then it's still with you years later.
Yeah.
Even though rationally you're like, that's a ridiculous idea, it's still with you until somebody comes along and helps you let it go.
Yeah.
And says like, no, that's not true.
Yeah.
That was never true. I'll show you it's not true.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but now you have all these different businesses.
Yes. So my father was a phenomenal man. So Haley and I, my twin and I, were adopted at 6 months and adopted into this fantastic family. My father had so many different kinds of businesses, as I was growing up, and that had a big impression on me, watching him, buy and sell and grow businesses. And so I think Haley and I have become a little mini me's of our father. So all the businesses I've run with my twin, and we do such a diverse range of things, and we have a bit of an ethos is if it's not fun, we'll stop. So we've got a good, healthy view on it all, and we have stopped things. Recently, we closed down a company we worked really hard on for 2 years. Just it wasn't fun. It wasn't bringing us any joy anymore.
I love it.
So, but we're in a very fortunate position to be able to do that because the other companies are doing financially well. So
tell me about the attitude, the speaking that you do on attitude.
I do a lot
and how little is about skill, from what I understand of your work.
Yeah.
Helping people see how little of it is actual skill and talent and how much of it is attitude.
Yeah, so I read the highlights of a research paper many years ago where they looked into top performers, those who'd really excelled in their chosen fields, and they found that when they drilled into what had made these people successful, only 15% of it could be attributed to skill, but 85% was down to their attitude. And for me, coming back from the Atlantic Row, what had become really apparent was that it was attitude that got me across. I had certain things I did every day that were mindset kind of attitude activities that helped me stay positive at sea. And what I do now is when I speak a lot on how anyone can do that, because it's not rocket science. It's they're structured things that can be applied that control the way you think, because there's this equation, what we think about affects how we feel, and that in turn affects how we act. And the result of that action is either positive or negative, depending on what we first thought about, and that we have this complete control of that first bit, the thought. We're the thinker of our thoughts. We get to decide this bit. And as soon as we realize that, it changes the way we view absolutely everything.
Yeah.
So if we want to view the world through a lens of the world is evil and against me, and my boss hates me, and my husband does this all the time, then of course we'll see evidence of that all the time because we train our subconscious brain to look for those things to happen. But when we train our subconscious brain to look for the positives in life, for the good stuff, we start to see it everywhere.
And you now, I love that. You go, now you're still doing expeditions.
Yes.
And like, what would that be? You cook up something insane and then you go do it to this day.
Yeah, so they're quite varied. So this year, in fact, in 2 weeks, I'm going to cycle from the Atlantic coast to the Mediterranean coast via the Pyrenees Mountains, which is kind of partly because I busted my knee recently, so I've had some reconstructive surgery. So really, the only thing I can do is cycle at the moment. But we did a brilliant project just recently, which was actually a bit of a crossover project. It was for our other company, Mixed Diversity Developers, where we work with global organizations to help them be more inclusive places to work. And we did a project in the Arctic for a car company. We took 12 of their female employees off. We kind of spent a year training them to be Arctic explorers, kind of desk-bound office workers.
What did you know about Arctic exploring?
Well, all expeditions are the same, and that it's about coping in an extreme environment, being able to navigate, being able to look after yourself and your team. And so there's actually great commonality across every adventure.
So there's some basics that once you have a handle on what it is, then whether it's hot, cold,
it's
high, low, whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah, it's about controlling the risks and managing the risks and keeping mentally and physically healthy along the journey.
So you take 12 employees from this car company.
Yeah.
Women.
Women. And what we're trying to do is, we're very aware that in that industry, the car industry, there's a lot of unconscious bias. It's a very male-dominated world. And we were trying to use these women's stories as hooks, really, to hang messages on around what we do or do not perceive women can do. And it was a great project, fraught with problems around how do you protect people from polar bears.
So where did you go? You hiked in the Arctic?
So we did a traverse of Baffin Island in the Arctic Circle.
How long does that take?
It was about 2 weeks, but about 10 days of that is the crossing.
And there are polar bear. That's an issue.
Yeah. Yeah, so, we had to put up bear fences and everyone had a bear flare and, we had an Inuit traveling with the team who had a rifle and, so it's an interesting world as a professional adventurer. I've got this wonderful woman, Steph, who works for me and she's always laughing at the diversity of her job. I'm like, Steph, go and research polar bear, anti-whatevers, and she's like, I love my job,
Have you been in any situation since the row? Have you been in equally terrifying situations like the row since the row?
I think they're all challenging for their own
different ways.
I've definitely not been as lonely.
Yeah. Do you ever wonder? Is your mind? I imagine that your mind has built up muscles. Now, having done expedition after expedition.
Yeah.
To where you would have panicked a while ago and now you stay calm? Does the mind just get that much stronger?
I think you learn techniques and strategies that work for you. So I have a whole load of kind of mindset tools and techniques that I rely on when I'm doing the expeditions, but actually have noticed that they work just as well in my home life with the kids.
Where can people get these, by the way? Polar bears, kids. Yeah. We can draw all the connections. Are these accessible?
Yeah, there's some of the ideas would be on my TED Talk, or I have a vlog where I've just started it. I don't know whether I'm going to keep going with this. It's a bit like you when you first started this RobCast.
You just don't know. You just don't know where we're going. Yeah.
So I've been trying to put them into little 3-minute videos on my website, debrasearle.com, to see whether they resonate with people. Because I think more than anything what I would love to do now and focus on is how do you help people live intentionally? How do you help them see how much joy there is to be had every day? And we just seem to miss out on so much of it because of the routine and the humdrum of life. And I think it's all attitude based, and we have complete control over that. I had this thing I would do at sea where every morning, in fact, it was because of something Hayley had said to me during this phone call when she's telling me I'm going to be a TV presenter. She also went on to say, Debs, you've just got to choose your attitude about this. And I was like...
She's sitting in a chair
exactly. And I'm
England.
Like, I would punch you now if you were here. But actually...
Drinking tea, saying, you know what your problem is out there in the ocean?
Yeah. But it stuck. And I remember writing, choose your attitude, because I think it stuck because I realized that nothing else out there I had a choice about. I couldn't choose whether I got blown backwards 30 miles or attacked by a shark or run over by a ship, but I could always choose the attitude with which I bounced back from those problems. And so I did this routine every morning where I'd sit by the hatch where I'd written this, and I would say, right, come on, Debra, choose your attitude. Which one is it going to be today? And it wasn't about always choosing a positive attitude, because that's not what was always needed. Sometimes it was a patient attitude or, whatever. But the key to it, I noticed, was that taking this next step, which was I had to list out loud what would be the outcome if I could stick to that attitude. Like today, if I pick optimism, what would happen? Well, I suppose if I'm being optimistic, I might pull hard and then I'll do more miles in this day. And it's like I would train my subconscious brain by listing these things to find ways to make them happen. And so I've stuck to that one. I still do that one on expeditions, on, before meetings, every morning. That's the one I've stuck to. Choose your attitude each morning, and then what would be the outcome if you stuck to it? Because I think we've got this potential in our subconscious brain that we don't capitalize on at all. That if we can tap into that bit of our thinking, that when you decide you want to buy a certain type of new car, you then start seeing them everywhere.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
That bit. When we start to tap into that bit of our subconscious brain, we can capitalize on getting to the goals or the opportunities or the way of life or the intentionality that we really desire.
I love that. I'm always struck with how hope is different than optimism. That optimism and pessimism are like states of, how you're thinking. Are you thinking positively, negatively? But like this one line in the New Testament about how hope is because you've suffered and persevered. It's like hope isn't like, how you're thinking today. It's this thing that got formed in you because you kept going. And then you realize that thing that you were terrified of, you actually made it through. So the next time that thing comes your way, you're like, oh, I've already done this.
Yeah.
That it isn't like a state of thinking. It's a thing that's been formed in you that you draw on, going to your idea of the subconscious. Something got formed in you that is simply present.
And I think there's an issue with the way we contextualize things as well. The way we have this propensity to blow things out of proportion. I have this scale that I would use at sea. Like the days were desperate. I'd be like, okay, how bad is it? I had a how bad is it scale.
Yeah.
And 1 was, you've made it to Barbados, and 10 was, okay, you're being eaten by a shark, because that's about as bad as I could imagine it getting. And on my absolute worst days at sea, when I would say, this is rock bottom, I can get no lower than here, I'm desperate, I would go, okay, how bad is it, Debra? And if I put myself on the scale, I was often only ever at about a 6 or a 7. I could deal with so much more mental and physical hardship than that. And so I've got this new scale now, and I still ask myself, like, the new scale is, the businesses have gone bankrupt and I've lost the house. Like, that would be pretty bad. That's number 10 on the scale. And even on my worst days in the office, when I've blown it all out of proportion yet again, and I put myself on the scale, I'm like a 3 or a 4. I mean, there's so much more that could happen.
I love that. Make a scale.
Yeah. How bad is it scale?
How bad is it?
Because it's never as bad as we think it is.
Now, your daughters are 7 and 9?
Yes.
If I were, what are their names?
Heidi and Molly.
Heidi and Molly. If I say Heidi and Molly, what's your mom do exactly?
They would say, oh, she's a professional adventurer.
Would they really?
Yeah. Yeah, that's what they tell everyone.
It's
what's on my business card.
So much joy that that you're getting to raise daughters with this view of the world.
I love it. So this is what happened last week. My daughter went to a holiday camp at an activity center, and she came home so proud to tell me that as they were packing up at the end of the day, one of the instructors had said, I need 2 strong boys to come and help me lift this stuff back inside. And she stood there indignant and went, excuse me, like, girls can be strong too, and of course she's, it's not that I talk about that at home, but it's what she sees. She sees that I'm taking women off to the Arctic, and I'm, and that women can be just as strong as men. So she's become this little fantastic feminist who is out to prove that women can be as strong as men, which I love, because I think there is a need for that in their generation. I worry about their generation because I don't think they have this depth of resilience that our generation, particularly our parents' generation, have got. That they haven't had to be resilient in many ways. They haven't lived through a world war. They're not the children of people who've been through a world war. And so they they have a mindset that is, I don't think, is equipping them for adult life well.
Yeah, it's like our previous generations, our parents and our parents' parents worked so hard to give us a great life that they were successful. Like, you did it.
Yeah.
And the problem is
Yeah.
we were handed something so great and in some ways easy that
Yeah.
there are all of these struggles we simply haven't had.
Yeah.
And you can see it around, like we gained a whole number of things, but we also somehow lost. Feels like all these people are waking up to what we lost
Yes.
in
yeah.
all this. Even all of the Tough Mudder and all the races and all of the challenges people are putting them through. Start every day with a cold shower. Like even the little things that people are like,
Yeah.
bring some suffering back in because it's good.
Yeah, well, I guess that's partly it, and I think it's a combination of that and the lack of exposure to the outdoors that young people have now. You know, if you're 40 plus, the average was 71% of our time was spent playing outdoors. It's now dropped to 21%. So the children are not going outdoors. They're not having that chance to do outdoor play that builds resilience and all the fantastic things that kind of come with it around reduction of stress and obesity levels and all of those other things. And so the joy for us as parents is we get the chance to gift them that, to teach them that actually pinching on a tablet screen and zooming in to see the great outdoors is never going to be as good as being there and feeling it. Like we can't, you don't feel that. You've got to be out there on the mountain or by the coast or in the sea to experience that. And that's a real challenge, I think, for us as parents because we're all so busy. That's busy. It's what we talk about all the time. And so we run out of ideas. We get home and we want to do something with the kids outdoors, but we're just so exhausted. Like that's what I see and it's what I feel sometimes. And so for me, it's the real challenge of how do we not ignore the technology because we can't ignore it. Their generation knows nothing but technology.
Right, it's here.
So how do we capitalize on it and make it something that's fun, but still encourages them outdoors? So an example would be, and I just did a vlog on this recently, is that my kids love Junior MasterChef. And so I think there's a way to take stuff they love on a screen and then you transplant it in the great outdoors. So we go into the garden and I give them a pair of scissors and a little bowl and 3 plates, and they've got to do a starter, a main course and a dessert made out of bits that they cut from, flowers or leaves, or they've got to make it look like a beautiful meal. And so they end up with, dirt under their fingernails and touching nature in a way that when they get home from school, it doesn't naturally seem to happen now. It's much easier to hand them an iPad. So I think we have to be much more creative as parents to find ways to give them those opportunities.
Yes. My daughter started school yesterday, and I picked her up yesterday from school, and she says, I told my class about you and that jellyfish on the beach. Because there was this jellyfish on the beach when we were in Oregon last week, and it was massive, but it was dead. It'd been dead for a while. And she was like, it's alive. And I was like, no, it's not. It's dead. And we were having this discussion. So finally, I just took it apart into like lots of different pieces. She's like, I told him you beat up a jellyfish. I was like, that's the first story you told. No wonder the teacher, when I went to pick her up, looked at me like, you're the dad who beats up jellyfish. But it struck me that of all the things from the summer, because they had to share like one summer memory, and her friend, I'm like, you seriously, you told your teacher that I beat up a jellyfish, and her friend right there was like, I thought it was very funny. But it was funny to me that her one memory of the summer was like sand, fresh air, water, a large jellyfish, and her dad apparently beating it up.
Yeah.
Like all the screen time, which is just what a kid, that's the thing.
Because
was real.
They'll never remember their best day of television ever.
There was not one Minecraft story that she thought of telling.
But she'll tell that story for years. Probably.
Well, hopefully. Okay, so people can get a hold of you and all your businesses, and you coach, you teach, you consult, you inspire, you travel around and speak.
I do, yeah.
Take people to the polar bear, Arctic.
All of those things, yeah. So DebraSearle.com is generally where it all happens, or if it's on diversity and inclusion, the company's mixeddiversitydevelopers.co.uk.
DebraSearle.
That's right.
Debra Searle, as in Pearl.
That's right, yeah.
You are so I just find you so crazy inspiring, which I'm assuming you've been hearing now for many decades from people. But I love your grounded sense of how to think, and just all of it. I'm so glad that you came to the back house.
Thank you.
I think the rowing story is obviously fascinating, but what I'm always interested in is someone did something and then they kept going.
Yeah.
I'm always interested in the later,
Yeah.
as opposed to the person who's still running off of that adventure from however long ago. You keep coming up with new ones and figuring out how to bring more people in.
Yeah. Because, because it's you can't go through an experience like spending 3.5 months alone without it deeply changing you. And,
yeah, that's what I pick up.
And so I felt like my eyes were opened on that trip.
Yes.
To a new way of thinking and being, and
now you're helping open other people's eyes.
That's what. That's the goal. Yeah.
Just thank you. So, all my RobCast friends, there you go. By the way, I'm thinking about calling this episode Debra Searle did what?